Hi, everyone. Sorry it's been so long since I've been back to finish this story of Rahab. Been going through a few things, and I'm not sure whether I'm going to even continue some of these videos. Life is getting crazy. But anyway, I didn't want to leave Rahab hanging there. So here I am to talk about Rahab and finish up her story. And as we know, she was a prostitute. She helped the spies that came in to the promised land looking to see how they could find information for Joshua. And so she was promised that she and her family would be safe when they attacked Jericho. So, meanwhile, we already talked about how Joshua's all back making all these plans and how they crossed the Jordan and the water, God moved the water for them. And so eventually, when they get to the other side, it says, at that time the Lord told Joshua, make flint knives and circumcise this second generation of the Israelites. So Joshua made flint knives and circumcised the entire male population of Israel at Gibeath Haraloth. He didn't do it on the other side of the Jordan. They crossed the Jordan, and then he reestablished that covenant that God had made with them. And some of the men that had been in the wilderness had not been circumcised during this time. So he circumcised anybody who was old enough to do that. And then the Lord said to Joshua, this is verse 9, today I have rolled away the shame of your slavery in Egypt. So that place has been called Gilgal to this day. So they celebrated Passover on the evening of the 14th day of the first month. And the very next day they began to eat unleavened bread and roasted grain harvested from the land. And no manna appeared on the day the first ate from the crops of that land, and it was never seen again. So from that time on, the Israelite ate the crops of Canaan. So God is saying here, we're done with the manna. We're done with you roaming around, You're here in the promised land, and now you're going to eat of the bounty of the land. And that's what they started doing. Now, they still haven't attacked Jericho all this time, and Rahab is still in her house waiting, So chapter 6 says, now the gates of Jericho were shut tightly because the people were afraid of the Israelites, and no one was allowed to go in. But the Lord said to Joshua, I have given you Jericho, its king, and all its strong warriors. You and your fighting men should march around the town once a day for 6 days. Now, this seems kind of ridiculous, doesn't it? I mean, why is God telling them to do this? Well, I guess because he wants to display his power. I guess he wants to show that this is not something that they're going to do by might. It's something God is going to do for them. And he says, on the 7th day, you are to march around the town 7 times with the priests blowing the horns. And when you hear the priests give one long blast of the ram's horn, have all the people shout as loud as they can. And the walls of the town will collapse, and the people can charge straight into the town. So Joshua called all the priests together and said, take up the ark of the Lord's covenant and assign the priests to walk in front of it carrying a ram's horn. Then he gave orders to the people, march around the town, and the armed men will lead the way in front of the ark of the Lord. Now, the ark was their most solemn religious object. So to take that into battle, that was something, I think. And they were all to follow this ark because it was to symbolize that it was God doing this, not them. And so Joshua got up early the next morning, and the priests brought the ark of the Lord, and they, marched around the town. They did that for 6 days. So this is verse 15. On the 7th day, the Israelites got up at dawn and marched around the town as they had done before. But this time they went around the town 7 times. And the 7th time around, as the priests sounded the long blast on their horns, Joshua commanded the people, shout, for the Lord has given you the town. Jericho and everything in it must be completely destroyed as an offering to the Lord. Only Rahab the prostitute and the others in her house will be spared, for she protected our spies. So think about Rahab. She's inside these walls, and we know that her little inn was probably very close to the walls because that's how she allowed the spies to escape. And that's how she put the red cord, the scarlet cord, down out of her window. So she would have been hearing all of these ram's horns and shouting and whatever. And Joshua says, we're going to keep our promise. We're going to destroy everything in this town, but we're not going to touch Rahab and all the people in her house, because that's what we promised. And she helped the spies. And so that is exactly what they do. And when the people heard the sound of the ram's horns, they shouted as loud as they could, and suddenly the walls of Jericho collapsed, and the Israelites charged straight into the town and captured it. They completely destroyed everything with their swordsmen and completely destroyed everything in it with their swords. Meanwhile, Joshua said to the two spies, keep your promise. Go to the prostitute's house and bring her out along with all her family. The men who had been spies went in and brought out Rahab, her father, her mother, her brothers, and all the other relatives who were with her. And they moved her and her whole family to a safe place near the camp of Israel. Then the Israelites burned the town and everything in it, and only the things made from silver, gold, bronze, and iron were kept in the treasury of the Lord's house. So Joshua spared Rahab the prostitute and her relatives who were in her house, because she had hidden the spies that Joshua sent to Jericho, and she lives among the Israelites to this day. So she was very protected, you know. And the thing is, we find out later that it was her faith that saved her, because in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 31, they're listing all the people who have great faith. And it says, it was by faith that Rahab the prostitute was not destroyed with the people in her city who refused to obey God. She had given friendly welcome to the spies. It was by faith. She had faith. And that's why she was saved. And what became of her afterwards? You know, that's always a question. Well, we know that she got married, and we know that she had pretty famous children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, descendants, I should say. If we look in Matthew, we find out that there's a list here of all of the people who are in the record of Jesus' ancestors. And if you look in verse 4, it says, Ram was the father of Amminadab. Amminadab was the father of Nahshon. Nahshon was the father of Salmon. Salmon was the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. Now remember Boaz, if you remember the story of Ruth, Boaz is the kinsman redeemer that married Ruth. So Boaz's mother was Rahab, and his father was Salmon, who was in the line of David, and then, of course, in the line of Jesus. So Salmon was the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. Boaz was the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth. Obed was the father of Jesse, and Jesse was the father of King David. So let's see. King David goes back to Jesse. That's one generation. Jesse goes back to Obed. That's 2 generations. Obed goes back to Boaz. That's 3 generations. And Boaz goes back to Rahab, which is 4 generations back. That Rahab was able to get married somebody from Israel, and became a woman in the line of David, and then, of course, in the line of Jesus. So she had an amazing life of faith. And the fact that she had faith, I don't think you really see that originally. To me, it seemed like she was more like doing what needed to be done to save herself and save her family. But we do know from the text that she did believe that the Israelites' God was the one and only most powerful one God. And that is what saved her. That is what saved her. And that is why in Hebrews it says, in verse 31 of chapter 11, well, actually, let's go back to 30. It was by faith that the people of Israel marched around Jericho for 7 days and the walls came crashing down. That was the first thing, is that they had faith. It was by faith that Rahab the prostitute was not destroyed with the people in her city who refused to obey God, for she had given a friendly welcome to the spies. So all of these things happened by faith. Her waiting was by faith I can't imagine how hard it was for her to wait. She waited while they crossed the Jordan, collected stones, made a memorial, circumcised everybody, celebrated Passover, harvested the grain, and made some bread, and then eventually walked around the town for 7 days blowing these horns. So she had a lot of waiting, a lot of leaning on God's promises. And all of that would have been done through faith. So that's the end of Rahab's story. And I'm not exactly sure if I'm going to continue on with another story or not. But until then, remember Rahab, a woman of great faith and someone we could really look up to. Have a great day.